On that note, I would like to invite our next speaker, Dr. Ritu Gulati. Dr. Gulati is an architect with over 25 years of experience in academia, practice, and research. She holds a PhD in architecture from CEPT University, Ahmedabad, with specialization in sustainability, energy, environment, among others. Dr. Gulati is currently serving as the professor and head of department at Faculty of Architecture and Planning, Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam Technical University. She has been involved in numerous architectural, heritage, and energy compliant projects, including the conservation and redevelopment of Chhatar Manzil and Lal Baradari complexes in Lucknow. Her research focuses on traditional and vernacular houses in Lucknow and the Awadh region. Dr. Gulati has authored several high quality research papers in international and national journals, including conferences also. She is the editor of an extensive compilation of Banaras Ghats. Dr. Gulati has mentored numerous scholars at bachelor's, master's, as well as PhD level and has been a principal investigator in several national and international research papers and projects. In addition, she is a certified Griha evaluator and trainer and woman chair for North Zone ISHRE and an honorary consultant at Sakar, the design studio. She has been an eminent panelist for several forums, including ISHRE, Center for Science and Environment, and Better Interiors. She has received several accolades and awards for her contributions to academia, practice, research, including the APJ Abdul Kalam Technical University Award, A plus D Award, Sark Nation Awards, a few amongst them. Today, Dr. Gulati will be presenting the topic of Systemic Literature Review, or SLR as we call it. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Ritu Gulati to our program.
Thank you, Mahima. Thank you for those great words. I see a very good strength of about 80 people.
Yes, ma'am.
So I am presuming that most of them are researchers and they're enrolled in PhDs or they are interested in research. Thank you. We'll start the presentation.
Yes, ma'am.
I'll share my screen here. Well, a very good afternoon to all of you. And I'm sure you've had great sessions since yesterday, and you'll have many more good sessions to come in the next 3 days. I just want to know whether I'm audible. Is my voice enough loud, or do you want it to be louder? And
Ma'am, it's fairly audible.
okay,
Yeah.
great. Okay. So, and then I want to ask whether my screen is visible. Is my screen visible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. Great. So, the perils of an online lecture. I don't know whether you're listening, whether you're sleeping, or whether you're even there. But never mind. So, we'll try our bit to kind of add this extra knowledge to whatever you may know. I presume that a lot of you are pursuing research. It might be nice just to, so we already have 91 people. So, are you guys opening your cameras? Will you open your cameras?
Ma'am, we've disabled it at the moment
Okay,
because
okay,
otherwise the
okay.
presentation starts lagging.
Presentation
Yeah, yeah,
will
no,
lag.
no worries, no worries, no worries. I'll start. I'll start. Okay. So I will be talking about systemic literature study in architecture, or SLR as it is popularly called. Now, you know, research is changing so fast. I mean, I finished my PhD 6 years ago, and uh, I submitted 10 years ago. So maybe, and I really think, I wish these tools were available much longer, much before than they are now, because it makes research so much more easier and much more scientific. And it's such a joy to do research now because there is so much information also available. So I think you are in a, those pursuing PhD, of course, have the advantages of these tools and have certain disadvantages also, because then you are expected to follow a certain beaten path. but then it makes research much more easier, much more scientific. And in architecture, it is extremely imperative to have that scientificness or that objectivity, because if we have to complete our PhDs in time, there has to be a system. And once we followed the system, there should be no way that we say that this PhD will not work, this PhD cannot happen, this PhD is rejected. So at least we eliminate that subjectivity out of it. For the people who've not enrolled yet, who are thinking of doing research and otherwise also, these sessions might have helped in generating research questions, in helping you write research papers, and also help you do research projects, which a lot of you are engaged in, right, in the contemporary times. Now, when we look at research, I mean, the beauty about it is, Vandana was also mentioning the same yesterday, and I think we also realized it when we did research. When you start, you think you know so much, but then when you're towards the end, you realize you don't know anything, because there is so much data, so much review, so much literature, so much information available, that you don't even know. By the end of your thesis, you are doubting whether it will actually do something to the existing knowledge. And believe me, even that extra small dot that you may put on that existing text will definitely add to existing literature, because if you look at the last 5 years, and especially for people who've been reviewing those papers in the last 5 years, the research that is happening on specific topics is tremendous. The amount is humongous. I think COVID has also done that. People had time, they stayed home for a lot of time. And I mean, me personally, I mean, some of the journals I've already published in rejected my papers, or they asked for major changes. They said, we've got a huge load of research happening. So it's definitely happening. There is more funding available, there are more tools available, and people are definitely more interested. So research is always a cyclical process. There is some type of an initial conceptual framework that we start with. We have some ideas of how it's going to work. We make a research plan, we collect some data, we analyze it, and then we reflect on it. And that reflection will create a new conceptual framework. Because of course, when we've read and done and dusted with what we've done, it's going to change what we started off with. That conceptual framework might become a framework for somebody else, or might help you refine your own thesis. You will make a fresh research plan, you will collect some data, you will do analysis, and then reflect, review, and evaluate and change. So this is actually the addition to knowledge. So it's not about changing the world, it's not about bringing a revolution somewhere, but in your own way, in your own scope, you are just trying to add that extra bit in that capacity. We have to understand that every research also has a timeline. It is not something which is going to go on and go on for years, because it will become dated. Every topic which we select has a timeline, and it has its, otherwise it will become jaded. It doesn't have value. After 5 years, those issues might not even exist. Somebody else might be working on them, or they cease to have importance. So within that timeline, we do make a research plan, we collect data, we do analysis, and then we analyze, and we come up with certain conclusions which may form the basis for future research. And that is how most research topics are identified. I don't know which stage you are in. If you've started, you are eager. If you've been there for 2 years, you probably are excited, still excited. If you've been there for 3-4 years, you're probably in panic. And after that, it's just chaos. You're overwhelmed, you just want to finish it off. Every PhD thesis has its own story, and I think everybody can write a book on that, because it's such a individual journey. But we have to understand that to avoid being overwhelmed, we have to have a system in place. If that system is not in place, we might at every point feel clueless. For the first 3 years, we're constantly changing the premise of research, the research questions, the hypothesis, because of the amount of literature we keep on reviewing. Now, this is the pyramid we keep on talking about in research. It's a very important pyramid, because here we are narrowing down the review and available literature on the basis of quality, of evidence. Now that evidence is important, because we want to understand whether it's relevant or not, and what is relevant and what is not relevant. So a systematic review can be defined as the review of the evidence which is available in the form of literature on a clearly formulated question. Now that becomes extremely important. How clear, how succinct is your research question? And it uses systematic and explicit, clear methods to identify, select, and critically appraise relevant primary research. So we are, doing that in a very, so we are saying the research question is extremely clear, then we are identifying literature, and we are using systematic methods to identify literature. They are not random. And we extract and analyze the data from that research and then formulate a proper research plan. So a systematic review will actually help us redefining our research questions, will help us understanding our methodology, help us understanding the analysis, and come to a very clear conclusion. Now, systematic literature review, of course, there are many fields of research. Uh, Apparently, from whatever studies we have, it exists more in medical fields and more, I would say, more objective and more scientific fields. But in architecture, it's gathering more steam now, and people are looking to it for defined methods of selection and exclusion. Because you start on Google, you start on the net, or you go to these various journal platforms, and there are hundreds of researches available. You don't know what to do with them. So it's just a selection process, it's a sieving process. And because architectural research is an original investigation, we need some tools. It is not, in engineering, there might be, I'm not judging them, of course, but there might be better systems in place because they're very objective. 1+1 is definitely going to be 2. There is no other way about it. But in architecture, 1+1 may be 2, 4, 6, 8, depending on the context, the scope, and the examples we have. So it's even more important to adopt a systemic literature review system. Now, before we go to the systematic system, we need to understand what a literature review is. Literature review is a critical analysis of a literature on any specific topic. So if I'm studying on housing, if I want to look at certain aspects of policy making, if I want to look at sustainability indexes, I want to look at other aspects, I need to look for literature, and any analysis of that particular literature available on the topic will formulate a literature review. This is not an annotated bibliography. I'm sure somewhere you must have been taught about references, or probably the coming days we'll talk about it. An annotated bibliography is all the research that you can find. So it's a kind of a compilation of various topics that you can find on a selected research domain. So it's not an annotated bibliography. It is not just a summary. It is a critical analysis, and that is important, because unless you have that conceptual framework, and since we are a part of RDCs at a lot of places, the most important thing that a research scholar needs to understand is that the more clarity you will have on your premise, then it's just a job of completing 1, 2, 3, 4, the methodology, the data, the analysis, and then the final inferences. So making that conceptual framework, the initial framework that you have, or the research framework that you have, is the most important thing. And that research framework or that clarity will only come with a properly done literature review. So what is the difference? So in this, circle, we see a lot of, actually it looks like a kebab on the plate, but never mind. So you've got a small red ball, which is the literature review. Then you've got 4 other balls within a larger circle, which forms a systematic review. So if you look at systematic review, it will form a part from your literature review only, but it will have these 4 aspects. You will have the evidence of a gap. So there will be some type of a gap information analysis, and that gap will form your research. There will be a rapid review, there will be a scoping review. We'll talk about these further. A living systematic review, we'll talk about these in the coming slides. But that will, so you've got some uh, domain, some type of an information of the literature review, and you're trying to find a systematic review out of it to get more clarity on your research question, get more clarity about your methodology and your systems. So what is the method of a systematic review? So, of course, a literature review is an overview. Then you gather information. Then you find out whether your specific research question has been answered. Find out whether areas or perspectives have not been, what has not been covered. And then you analyze and evaluate the existing information. And you go back to your title and you go back to your premise and you change it. Now, what does a systematic literature review do? When you're doing a simple literature review, you're looking for information from all over. There is no no screening. There is no screening in terms of the year it was published, the place it was published, the titles, the keywords. There's nothing happening, and there might be some type of a bias related to the selection. Now, we might be researchers, because we are totally involved in our research, we don't think it as a bias. But for actual research to happen, it needs to be totally bias free. The research that you select is the most important thing, because that is giving you the future direction. So this is what a systematic review will do. It will address the need it addresses the need for a decision maker to be able to access high quality, relevant, accessible, and up-to-date information. And they minimize bias through the use of pre-specified research questions and methods that are documented in protocols, and they have those protocols. And normally, systematic reviews should be conducted by a team of people. It should not just be a single person, because it's a larger thing. But of course, we do it all the time as singulars and people together. And it has to include domain expertise and methodological expertise. And these people should be free from potential conflict of interest. I will not say, please take my paper. I will not say that this guy, I know they might have done some good research, please take this. So there is no conflict of interest happening anywhere. After this, the systematic literature review will also talk about good data management, project management, and it also has quality assurance mechanisms. So you know what you have selected is of good quality and is relevant. So what we are essentially doing in a systematic review is that we have a sieve. If you look at the diagram, it is a funnel, of course, which has a larger input and a smaller output. And you put in all those studies, and through the protocols that you decide, you get a more refined search, which is useful and applicable to your research domain. So this systematic literature review will contribute to the levels of evidence, will formulate conceptual frameworks, will identify the gaps. It will also assist you in considering your validity and scope of the research question that you started with, so that you can do the necessary revisions and fine-tuning. And it also provides a foundation to formulate and present strong arguments. So there are a lot of times when you will be asked, what is new about it? People have talked about it. People have done it 100 times. This has happened here. This has happened there. What are you going to do? How are you going to add to extra knowledge? This is going to happen only when you have a system. And nobody can say no to a system. So you tell them, this was the research, this is how I have screened it, this is how I've applied protocols to it, and this is the gap, and this is why it is relevant. So we all talk about literature reviews, but systematic reviews, like we discussed, are slightly different. So while the literature review qualitatively summarizes evidences by using informal or subjective methods, systematic review will have a high-level overview of primary research on a focused question. So it is much more scientific, it is much more evolved, and more quality-oriented. The goal of a literature review is to provide a summary or an overview, whereas the goal of a systematic review is to answer a focused clinical question. And it is also important to eliminate any type of a bias. The research question in a literature review can be a general topic also. Sometimes it can be a specific question also. But in a systematic review, it will be clearly defined and answerable clinical question, and it will recommend PICO as a guide. We'll talk about PICO and PEO and the other methods later on, but it will have some type of a systematic system which will, so I'll use the word system so many times because it's important to have a system, and we'll have a clearly defined and answerable clinical question by using these methods. The components of a literature review will have introduction, methods, discussion, conclusion, and a reference list. Whereas a systematic review will talk about a pre-specified eligibility criteria. How did we come to that, come to what we did? There will be a systematic search strategy. There will be an assessment of the validity of findings. There will be an interpretation and presentation of results, and there will be a reference list, of course. While in a literature review, the authors can be one or more. In a systematic review, they could be even more. The timeline for a literature review could be weeks to months, but for a systematic review, you need much more time. It can be years also. But yes, we are spending that amount of time on a PhD, right? The requirements of a literature review is that we need to understand the topic and perform search of one or more databases. In a systematic review, we need a thorough knowledge of the topic and perform search on all relevant databases so that we don't miss out on the important stuff. And there will be some type of a statistical analysis for these resources so that we know which ones to select and which ones not to select. So the value also increases of the research that you're doing. While the literature review gives a summary of literature, the systematic review will connect the practicing whatever here it says clinicians, but clinicians, but it will connect you to high quality evidence, and it supports evidence based practice. So in the coming times, everybody will be talking about this. Why, of course, we need to do it is because the volume of research is going very high, and you'll see a lot of examples of healthcare here because SLR is maximum being applied in healthcare because, of course, you need very, and there is much more literature available in the medical domain than the architecture domain. So we need, of course, we do it because there is so much of literature available. We do not want any bias. And why it is also important is that there is a lot of gray literature, which is non-validated literature, and we don't want to use that. So we cannot base our entire premise of a thesis on something which is not even valid or relevant. So the systematic literature review is giving us an up-to-date summary of the state of research knowledge. Up-to-date is extremely important. Of research knowledge on an intervention, any intervention, and an up-to-date summary of that in all the relevant data sources. It is highly structured, transparent, and reproducible methodology. This will involve a prior specification of a research question, which we almost have when we start a research. Then it also needs a clarity on the scope of the review and which studies are available for inclusion, making every effort to find all relevant research and to ensure that issues of bias in included studies are accounted for. And it also includes analyzing the included studies in order to draw conclusions based on all the identified research in an impartial and objective way. This is extremely important. So what we do is we do a topic selection, we conceptualize and create a protocol on the basis of which we will be able to find the research gap and also justify the selection of the topic or the research question. We are also looking for studies simultaneously which are present on all data sources across the sources that we have. Then we screen those studies on the basis of the protocols that we have. We screen them and we appraise them. There is a difference between screening. Appraising means that we give value to it. We give priority to it. Which one is more important, which one is lesser important. Then we abstract data, and then we synthesize and we interpret results. So, and as old timers, we think that clarity of the research question is most important. If you've got that right in your head, why are you doing it? What is your research? Then you can always answer the questions of how you're going to go about it and what will you achieve out of it. So This is the PICO approach. We'll talk about this in detail further. We'll talk about the various approaches. The PICO approach talks about population, interventions, comparison, and outcome. Of course, who should do a systematic review? A team, or at least some unobjective people with topic expertise, but no conflict of interest and no bias. In a lot of research projects, in a lot of other projects than PhDs, and sometimes PhDs also, when you're coming up with policy decisions and you're talking about stakeholders, you will need to map out all those potential stakeholders specific to the review. And the first step is, of course, they're invited. So they are more likely to be relevant to a broad range of end users if they are informed by the involvement of people. And engaging consumers and other stakeholders such as policymakers, research funders, and healthcare professionals increases relevance, promotes mutual learning and improved uptake, and decreases research waste. We are not producing anything which is not relevant. It is very important here to understand that the role of philosophical researches, or the relevance of philosophical researches, is not so much in contemporary times, because we are looking at more applied things. Research has to solve a problem, and most of the times, if it is not applied, it is not going to affect the society so much. And as architects and planners, it is our moral duty to be able to help the society in terms of the decisions, the policies, the actions, and the frameworks we make. So when we are working with other people, we need to have surveys, workshops, focus groups, involvement in advisory groups. So a review team should coordinate the input of the advisory group and inform key review decisions. The advisory group's input should continue throughout the systematic review process. This should reflect the breadth of the review questions, so the people it's going to affect. And consideration should be given to involving vulnerable and marginalized people to ensure that conclusions on the value of interventions are well informed and applicable to all groups in the society. Here, reliability becomes extremely important. Something happening here. Just a minute. I hope there's no problem. Can I continue?
Yes,
Yeah.
ma'am.
Okay. So, systematic reviews aim to be an accurate representation of the current state of knowledge about a given issue. As understanding improves, the review can be updated. Nevertheless, it is important that the review itself is accurate at the time of publication. So, while these reviews need to be both correct and be seen to be correct, detailed evidence based methods have been developed to guide review authors as most appropriate procedures to follow and what to include and what to not include. So, it is also important that transparent reporting happens of the data. So, whatever you've collected needs to be reported transparently without a bias, without any conflict of interest, and without these are all the basic ethics of research that, again, you must be understanding. There are protocols, there are ethics, and this management and quality assurance will only come if there is a objective reporting and analysis of the data that we've collected. There will be different type of reviews that keep on happening. The SLRs, the systematic literature reviews, they will have different aims and they will be more relevant in specific type of research questions, and they will also have different type of question formats and protocols. So if the review type is measuring effectiveness, for example, we are trying to evaluate the effectiveness of a certain treatment. Now this is healthcare. There is an architectural example coming on later, but like I said, there you will find better examples in the healthcare sector. So if you have to look at the effectiveness of certain things, the aim is to evaluate the effectiveness of, say, a certain treatment or a practice in terms of its impact or outcome. The question format will be PICO because it will look at the population, the intervention, the comparison, and the outcomes. And the question may be, what is the effectiveness of exercise for treating depression in adults compared to no treatment or a comparison treatment? So here we are looking at the effectiveness of exercise. The second review type may be more qualitative, it will be experiential. So we are trying to investigate the experience or meaningfulness of a particular phenomena. The question is, what is the experience of undergoing high technology medical imaging in adult patients in high income countries? So this is again an example, and the question format will be more about population because it's about people. There will be interest now. So, we'll be talking about the phenomena of interest and the context because we are looking at high income countries. The review type may be on costs, economic evaluation, on prevalence and incidence, and also on diagnostic test accuracy. It may be on etiology risk. It may be on expert opinion or policy. This will be slightly more uh, related to architecture and planning. The research, the SLR may also be psychometric. So here we are talking about the reliability, validity, responsiveness, and interpretability of methods to assess muscle strength. So we are looking at some psychometric tests to be able to do that. And here again, the method we've used is the PICO method, but the where we look at the more qualitative methods, say the population and the exposure and the outcome, we will use the PEO methods. Of course, these are just indicative. You will need to study on them in more detail as to which one will be more applicable to your research area. So, how a systematic review will happen is, firstly, you will need to identify a research question. Any conceptual research question will also work, and you will have to work out the inclusion and exclusion criteria. There are certain models, we will be talking about those models, and you can decide how the literature needs to be screened, whether it's in the basis of date, whether it's in the basis of title, whether it's in the basis of keywords, whether it's basis of context, what may be the ways you want to include and exclude certain amounts of literature. Then you will do a rigorous and systematic search of the literature. You will do a critical appraisal of the included studies. You will do data extraction and management, analysis and interpretation, and report for publication. That's, of course, it's a linear process. But of course, after the SLR, you may go back and change your research questions. You may go back and change your hypothesis a bit. The different types of systematic review, what we looked at in the previous slide, was a more detailed one, but there are actually three. One is a meta-analysis, which is a more statistical method of doing it. Second is a quantitative analysis, and third is a qualitative analysis. So the meta-analysis utilizes the statistical methods to incorporate appraisals of impact from relevant studies that are independent and yet comparable. Whereas the quantitative will combine the results of two or more studies by using statistical analysis, and qualitative analysis is generally defined as the result of the relevant studies are summarized, but they are not combined statistically. We have to, now this is again detailed. So here we talk about some criterias, which are the spider, the PICOs, the PICO, the SPICE, and the PEO. We'll talk about their full forms here. If you look at the right one, right top, table one, the PICOS is the population, problem, phenomena, intervention, comparison, outcome, study design. It is used often for medical health evidence-based reviews comparing interventions on a specific population type. The PEO is the population exposure outcome, and it is useful for qualitative research questions. The spider is a sample phenomena of interest, design, evaluation, research type, and it is often used for qualitative and mixed methods research questions. Eclipse is expectation, client group, location, impact, professionals, and service. It is used for policy and service evaluation. And SPICE is setting, perspective, intervention, comparison, and evaluation. It is related to service, project, or intervention evaluations. So, for example, you want to use the PICO statement to formulate a search strategy. An example is given in table 2, the bottom one. So if you look at the PICO approach, population will be, for a given research, maybe adult patients, they may be cardiac patients, and they may be surgery patients. The intervention is probably just to check paracetamol tablets. The comparison is with current standard treatment, and the outcome is pain reduction. So we've got a very clear research question where we say what may be the effect of paracetamol on adult patients who have cardiac problems and who have surgery issues, with the intervention with comparison to the current standard treatment in pain reduction. So our research question is extremely clear. So if we are able to kind of break our research question into parts as to what we exactly want to evaluate, we will be also able to understand the strategy we want to use. So if you look at the main stages, again, we are just trying to go back to what we discussed in the previous slides. We will define the aims of the study, which might be a set of research questions or objectives. We will refine and formalize the research question, remove ambiguity and focus on key concepts. We will break the question down into specific concepts and build a search criteria based on those concepts. So the more you can break down your research question, the more objective it will be, the more it will not have any bias, and it will help you search the right literature. So and build a search criteria based on those concepts and related synonyms also. Then you will search the literature sources, which may be the various databases that accept. There will be some gray literature which is also present, and there might be some other thesis also. Then you will screen the literature based on the relevance of the title and abstract to the research question. Then you will screen the already selected ones, the resulting full text literature based on the relevance. Then you will extract data, then you will synthesize, and then you will have findings. So how do we select which literature to refer, which literature not to refer? Again, a flow chart is given, useful flow chart. We start from the left and go to the right one. First, if you look at the title of the paper, does the title reflect the content? So there's something called intelligent vertical reading, and there's something called a detailed reading. So you should all, while you're all preparing for research, you should know how to do intelligent vertical reading. So if you look at the title, you'll immediately know, you'll go to the abstract, go to the vertical reading, and does it reflect the content? Are the authors credible? Now, this is slightly difficult to say, but there are times when you will realize that it's just they don't have any research standing, so maybe taking their paper is also not something which is doable. Does the abstract summarize the key components? A succinct abstract is the key to a good paper. Is the rationale for undertaking the research clearly outlined? Have they been able to say why they've taken that particular research? Is the literature comprehensive and up to date? A lot of times you'll see papers, you'll see researches, they're citing articles and papers of 2002. It's not even relevant. So most of the times we should be looking at literature at max 5 years from your initiation of research. Then, is the aim of the research clearly stated? Are the ethical issues identified and addressed? Is the methodology justified is the methodology identified and justified? Then you'll have two parameters. One is the quantitative, one is the qualitative. The quantitative one will say, is the study design clearly identified? And is the rationale for choice of design evident? That's what you're looking at a paper. Of course, it matches the title of your paper, your research premise, but then does it have all this? The quantitative one further says, is an experimental hypothesis clearly stated? Are the key variables clearly defined? Is the population identified? Is the sample adequately described and reflective of the population? Is the method of data collection valid and reliable? Because this is what your supervisor or your RDC is also trying to check, or your research advisor is going to check, because these are the systems to evaluate any research paper. We keep on reviewing a lot of research papers and researches all the time. So this is what we're doing. Is the method of data analysis valid and reliable? If you're looking at qualitative aspects, we'll say, are the philosophical background and study design identified and the rationale for the choice of design evident? Do we know why that person is uh, uh, doing it? Are the major concepts identified? Is the context of the study outlined? Is the selection of participants described and the sampling methods identified? Is the method of data collection auditable? There are certain methods of audit. I think we talked about it in some previous slide. Is the method of data analysis credible and confirmable? And then both of them will combine to say, are the results presented in a way that is appropriate and clear? Can we get what they've actually achieved? Is the discussion comprehensive? Are the results generalizable and are the results transferable? And is the conclusion comprehensive? So if we've been able to decide the paper on the basis of this, the literature on the basis of this, I think we have a lot of job done. We might not be looking at 200 literatures, we don't need to, but 20 relevant ones will be good enough. So again, it kind of reiterates what we've talked about. You review the planning, there's a question formulation, there is a search strategy, there is a selection process, there is strength of evidence, analysis, synthesis, and process monitoring. Again, something that we've discussed before. There are two frameworks which will help you identify and define your research question, the PICO and the PEO. Quantitative ones will use PICO, the more qualitative ones will use PEO, and SPIDER is a slightly more integrated one which will take both. Then you will find the search terms, you will create the search blocks, you will look for literature, you will search in a structured way. Of course, there are ways of going around looking in the database also. You should have to adapt your use of subject headings. You will need to use your and or very carefully, and you will save time by documenting your search queries. Then you might need to narrow or broaden your search by examining your search results, investigating whether your key articles are present, and by using your advanced search form, you can improve your research. Then you will analyze the search results. Are you getting too few search hits? Then you will change your keywords, you will change your words. I think you all know the drill. Then while selecting articles, read through the titles and abstracts to see its relevancy. Quick vertical reading, check the quality of each study. And then critical appraisal worksheets or checklists might be useful to understand which one is relevant and which one is not relevant. And there are so many times when you're sitting in the RDC and the juror is asking, why didn't you see this X report that was published here? Why didn't you see this Y paper that was published there? I mean, this is what we are looking to eliminate. We are trying to look at all relevant stuff. Otherwise, there's no end to all the data that is available. Then this is an example which might interest you slightly more. This is an architectural example of research. It talks about healthy architecture. It talks about people having to stay indoors for a long period of time. And they're trying to say, what are the indicators of healthy architecture? And they've tried to perform a systematic literature review of those indicators. So an interesting study. And so this is the abstract. They first establish the architectural health indices, the relevance of those architectural health indices, and their role in their effects on human health, and it is associated with the design of buildings. Then why was a systematic literature review conducted? It was to reveal the current state of knowledge, gaps, explore potential usage, and highlight best practice. Again, trying to find out what people are doing. The scope was also limited. It was limited to the scale of a building, and especially those aspects within the limits of a professional architect. 3 electronic bibliographic databases were explored from 2008 to 2019. A 2-stage selection was undertaken and checklists were carried out. From 15 included studies, 127 documents were identified. These included 101 AHIs. AHIs are the architectural health indices. A sample of the most commonly AHIs was then analyzed at an item level. And then the review revealed that most AHIs are actually limited to measuring communicable diseases that directly affect physical health. For example, air quality and water quality. There were very few indicators focusing on factors affecting mental and social health. Now, of course, these problems are rising the moment we stay more indoors, more in indoors, these problems are adding up. So here now we also find out the research gap. We say that there is a lot of review available on architectural health indices, but most of it talks about communicable diseases and they affect physical health. But mental health and social health is also important, and none of the AHIs apparently seem to do that. And that is why there is a need for developing an architectural health index which also responds or which also checks the effect on mental and social health. This becomes the structured framework. The methodology that it uses is actually the Prisma P. The protocol, it is called the Preferred Reporting Items for Systematic Review and Meta-Analysis Protocols. This is one type. There are many other types, but I've seen a lot of people using this one. It is basically using a lot of data to analyze, because meta-analysis is being used here. So what happens is that after using this, you are able to select and narrow down to the researches that you have. The objective is clearly defined. It is to identify the architectural health indicators that aim to enable the assessment and evaluation of the impact of architectural design on occupant health. So there were three stages to this exercise. First, meta-analysis, that is this Prisma approach. Then literature review studies of AHIs were identified for inclusion. Then the architectural health indicators were extracted from those included studies. And thirdly, an item level criteria were extracted from a subset of the most frequently used AHIs. Because they've already been tested, they've already been used. So which ones are supposed to be used? And that forms a framework for your own research. So a search strategy was used. The search strategy that was used is here. So you've got, if you look at the population is not restricted. It is the whole population. We've used the PICO strategy. Here, the population were all the building occupants. The interventions of interest were the AHI as a proxy measure of exposure to building design. No restriction was based on control or comparison, and included outcome was simply human health. Included study design at first stage was for systematic reviews, meta-analysis, literature reviews, comparative reviews, and critical comparisons of AHI. As architects, we are taught in a very different way, and a lot of you might be having problems with all the theoretical data that is being thrown at you. The sooner you learn it, the better it is. Don't avoid it. If you interdisciplinary studies are the way to go. If we are not doing interdisciplinary research, we will fall out of our great bubbles that we have, where we say architect is the most important and planners are the most important. We have to contribute to what others are doing, and the best way to start is to look at data and to look at theoretical research. Do not have a mental block. Then while you look at the search strategy, there were 3 electronic databases that were searched: the Cochrane Central Register of Control Trials, the Medline, and Scopus. And again, the inclusion criteria for studies in English conducted from January 2008 to January 2019. This is the summary of some of the included studies. Why I'm showing you this is, this table might help you formulate your own table. This shows the reference number. This shows the study design or sourced from, the aim of that research, the potential AHI reviewed, what was the number, the named AHI that were reviewed, and other potential AHIs referenced in that particular research. So a kind of a system was made for all the researches in a similar format. And what we got here was this. After the systematic literature review, after identifying these 4 type of data sources, the record screen, there were some duplicates that were removed. The number was 446. Then Out of these, wrong outcome was 389, wrong intervention was 375, wrong study design was 12. Then only 29 full text articles were screened for eligibility. Then they were kind of checked for their quality, and the full text records that were excluded were 14 because they were wrong study design, wrong outcome, date, and full text was not available. So the finally the studies that were included in the narrative synthesis were only 15, and out of those 15 studies, the AHIs, or the number of indicators that were extracted, were 127. Going forward, the HIs extracted from included studies were 127. Then they were screened item wise. And after those screening, 22 were excluded because incomplete reference was available. It was not a complete tool. They were superseded by other indicators. They were for existing buildings. They were not for buildings. They were for wrong population types. They were unofficial derivatives. There were statutory codes. So the only AHIs that were included were 105, and these were the included health criteria within the widely used AHIs. So you had LEED, you had BREEAM, you had CASB, you had Green Star, and so on and so forth, and they contributed to the number of criteria that we were talking about. And the conclusion of this research was very clear. So this systematic literature review provides the most comprehensive list of AHIs currently available, which should be of value to other researchers as a source for further investigation. The findings highlighted four key themes that emerged related to scale, scope, source, and scoring. So there was, again, it only showed us a handful of AHIs: BREEAM, LEED, SB Tool, CASB, and Green Star, plus there were some newer indicators also by Fitwell and WPS. And these are the most widely used ones in the industry. And it is notable that the source of each of these AHIs emerged from evaluation tools where the main focus was on measuring environmental efficiency, material sustainability, and energy performance. And uh, it also says that the findings highlight that there is limited accounting of factors related to non-communicable diseases, which restricts the utility and relevance of AHI. Now, we've already found the gap. We found that these indicators were there, but there's actually a gap of the indicators that exist for non-communicable diseases. The scoring systems vary across different schemes. So there is a need for developing a new architectural health index which measures all these systems, and that AHI needs to be more comprehensive, which allows for fuller evaluation of health implications of architecture. So we have a very systematic way of coming to the research gap. And by on the way, we've also discovered a methodology. We've also discovered the methods to analyze it, and the way forward is extremely clear. This is where my presentation ends. I hope it was of some value to most of you. Do we have any questions related to?
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you for a very systemic presentation on systematic literature review. The platform is now open for questions.
We have a lot of participants, right? We've got 106.
Our strength is at 106 right now.
Oh, great. So there are only two reasons of not asking questions. One is सब कुछ समझ में आ गया, and second is कुछ समझ नहीं आया. So guys, I hope this was of some value.
I think it was of quite enlightening.
It falls on you to take the
No,
road now.
no, because at all levels, I think at all levels, this presentation helped us in understanding, like at for beginners level, you told us how annotated bibliography is different from literature review. Then how literature review is different from systemic literature review. So, and how transparent reporting and reporting of data and segregating data and qualitative and quantitative data. So I think at different levels of PhD, this presentation struck a chord for different scholars.
I hope
So
so.
it was a very enlightening presentation on the SLR, and your extensive experience and expertise in this, I think it came out through your talk. It was a great learning experience for all of us, and we appreciate the insights that you have shared with us today. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Yes,
There is no.
thank you, Professor Gulati, and it was enlightening and a very extensive presentation from your side. And I again, once again, would like to thank you from the organizing team for giving us time and your valuable knowledge to the participants. Thank you, madam.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you
you
so
so much.
much.
Okay. Bye.
So we will break for lunch. Again, it's a request to please attend all these sessions, since 100% attendance is compulsory for the e-certificate to be issued. And we will meet back at 2:20 so that we can start at 2:30.
Thank you, madam.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.